I wish I had never done it. My life would have been better if I had never gone to George Knapp. That's Bob Lazar. In 2019, sitting across from Joe Rogan in Studio City, California, explaining what it cost him to tell the truth about what he saw inside a mountain in the Nevada desert in 1989. This is documented. Episode 1, I'm Isaac. And if you're new here, congrats. Your algorithm thinks you're insane. Welcome. We are going to spend the next hour walking through, in obsessive detail, the story of a contract physicist named Bob Lazar, who claims he worked on a recovered non-human spacecraft for the United States government. I believe him. I'm going to tell you why. And if I get disappeared after this episode, check the basement at Papoose Lake. Look, I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds. The government has flying saucers is the kind of sentence that ends careers in serious journalism. But here's the thing about Bob Lazar that I want you to hold in your head before we go a single sentence further. Every time, for 35 years, every single time we have gotten a chance to check his story against the historical record, the check has come back in his favor. Every time. So before we even talk about who Bob Lazar is, let me tell you what I think, so you can calibrate everything I say against that. I believe him. I'm not credulous. I'm not in this for clicks. I am that guy who read every contemporaneous newspaper article, watched every Knapp tape, listened to JRE 1315 3 times, sat through the Corbell documentary twice, and read the actual Dubna paper on the 2003 element 1 in 15 synthesis. Yes, I'm that guy. We're friends now. Let's go. Robert Scott Lazar. Born January 26, 1959. Coral Gables, Florida. His father is Albert Lazar, a high school dropout, who claws his way up to vice president of a company called Mego Toys. If you grew up in the 1970s, you held a Mego toy. They made the original Star Trek action figures, the ones with the velour uniforms. They made the Planet of the Apes figures. They made the Batman doll with the cloth cape that immediately fell off the first time you used him. So, just to be clear up front, Bob Lazar's dad ran the company that made your childhood toys, and Bob Lazar himself is going to spend his adult life inside a mountain reverse engineering UFOs. Got it? Cool. Moving on. His mom Phyllis is a homemaker. They move around. Bronx, Coral Gables, eventually Brooklyn. And from about age 12. The thing you need to know about Bob is the ratio of his patience for theory to his patience for hands-on work. Most kids who say they like science are interested in the idea of science. Bob is interested in the mechanism. Most 12-year-olds want a rocket because rockets are cool. Bob Lazar, at 12, wants to build the rocket because he wants to understand the combustion chamber. That is a different kind of brain. By 15, he is bolting a small gas engine onto his bicycle. By 17, he is building his own Van de Graaff generator. By age 19, he is building photographic equipment for sale. He is not buying kits. He is sourcing components, designing systems, fabricating mounts. The future Bob Lazar is very obviously already inside the 12-year-old Bob Lazar. We can see him from the start. And then the jet car. Okay, I need you to come with me on the jet car. Because the jet car is, to me, the most important thing in Bob Lazar's biography that nobody talks about. In 1982, Bob Lazar is 23. He is, at this point, already working at Los Alamos National Laboratory as a contract technician. We'll get to how he got there in a minute. And he decides he is going to drop a jet engine into a Honda. Not a car. A Honda CX-500 motorcycle. The motorcycle stock engine comes out. A small APU-class jet turbine, the kind that gets used as an auxiliary power unit on commercial aircraft, goes in. He machines the mounts himself. He routes the fuel lines himself. He designs the exhaust path himself. And then he rides it around town, on the street, in the year of our Lord 1982. Then he goes, let me make this a car. So he upgrades from the motorcycle to an actual Honda automobile, drops the turbine into that, drives it. And on June 27, 1982, the Los Alamos Monitor, which is the actual newspaper of the actual town of Los Alamos, New Mexico, runs a feature article about him. There is a photograph. Bob Lazar stands next to his jet car. He is 23. He is grinning. The headline is, LA Man joins the jet set. I want you to internalize the date on that newspaper, June 27, 1982. Bob Lazar's first interview with George Knapp about UFOs is in May 1989. That's 7 years later. The jet car newspaper exists 7 years before the UFO story does. 7 years before he has any conceivable motive to fabricate a credential history. And in 1982, before any of this is on the table, he is already in the local paper as the obsessive, hands-on technician who built a jet car at 23. So, when the standard skeptical move on Bob Lazar is he made it all up to get famous, the jet car newspaper says, no, this is who he was before there was anything to make up. He was building impossible things before he had any reason to tell an impossible story. The foundation of his identity predates the UFO claim by a presidential term. That matters. That matters way more than people realize. Okay, how does he get to Los Alamos in the first place? The way Bob tells it, he doesn't want to go to a university. He doesn't want to sit in lectures. He picks up technical courses at community college level, including Pierce College in the San Fernando Valley. And in 1982, he gets a contract job through a staffing company called Kirk Mayer Inc., which placed technicians at national laboratories. They assigned him to LANL, specifically to LAMP, the Los Alamos Meson Physics Facility, which is a proton linear accelerator that, at peak, ran an 800 MeV beam, one of the most powerful in the world at the time. His role, not physicist, technician. He builds the instrumentation, he fabricates the housings, he debugs the electronics when something doesn't work. He is the guy who makes the experiment physically possible, and he is doing this every day inside one of the most significant nuclear physics facilities in the United States, surrounded by working physicists, absorbing the vocabulary of experimental nuclear physics the way an apprentice absorbs a trade, not from a textbook, by doing it. Now we have to talk about the degrees, because this is the part of the Lazar story that the internet has been arguing about for 35 years, and I want to deal with it head on. Lazar has claimed since 1989 that he holds a master's degree in physics from MIT and a master's in electronic technology from Caltech. Both schools, when asked, say they have no record of him. The skeptical position is he lied about the degrees. The believer position is his records were scrubbed. Here's why the believer position is not crazy. We have one confirmed instance of an institution lying about Bob Lazar's records, and we know it because they got caught. Los Alamos National Laboratory told George Knapp on camera in 1989 that they had never employed Bob Lazar. The next day, Knapp went and pulled the 1982 internal LANL phone book. There Bob is. Lazar, Robert, Kirk Meyer, Inc., Lumpf, mail stop H841. The lab lied. The phone book caught them. So when MIT and Caltech say they have no record of him, we are being asked to assume that those denials are honest, while we already know the parallel denial from Los Alamos was a lie. That's not, let's say, a great epistemic position to start from. I'll come back to the credentials thing, I want to get to the phone book moment in its proper context, because the phone book is the thing that turns this from a story into a case. 1988. 6 years after the Jet Car newspaper. Bob is living in Las Vegas, doing technical contracting work. Not famous, not wealthy. A guy in his late 20s paying his bills. And he gets a call. The version of the story Bob has told most consistently is that the call traces back to Edward Teller. Yes, that Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, co-designer of the Teller-Ulam radiation implosion device, Manhattan Project veteran, one of the most consequential physicists of the 20th century. Here's how Teller knew who Bob Lazar was. In June 1982, Teller gave a lecture at Los Alamos. The same June 1982, when Bob's jet car was in the local paper. Teller had already seen the jet car article when he gave the lecture. After the lecture, in the social hour, Lazar walked up to Teller and introduced himself. They talked. Teller, being a working physicist who had been famous for 40 years, was genuinely interested in the kid who built the jet car. They had a real conversation. Lazar walked away with Teller's phone number, which, when a journalist later called it, connected to Teller's actual office at Hoover Institution at Stanford. That's verified. The number was real. 6 years later, somebody is scouting for technically capable people who can keep a secret. Teller remembers the jet car kid, or somebody Teller trusts remembers him on Teller's behalf. A name gets put forward. Bob Lazar gets a call from EG&G Special Projects. Okay, quick context on EG&G, because most people just say defense contractor and move on. And that does the story a disservice. EG&G stands for Edgerton, Germeshausen, and Greer. It was founded by Harold Edgerton, MIT professor, the man who invented modern high-speed strobe photography. The bullet through the apple photograph, that's Edgerton. The milk drop crown, Edgerton. The .30 caliber slicing a playing card, Edgerton. EG&G's first government client was the Atomic Energy Commission. EG&G built the high-speed instrumentation that captured Trinity in July 1945. They went on to build the diagnostics for every nuclear test that followed. And by the 1980s, EG&G has become the operational contractor for a significant chunk of classified activity at the Nevada Test Site Complex, which includes Groom Lake, which includes Area 51. The unmarked 737 that fly contractors from McCarran International Airport out to Groom Lake, those are operated by EG&G's special purpose aircraft. They still operate. The call sign is Janet. There's a dedicated terminal at McCarran. You can stand at the public viewing area at Takaboo Valley with binoculars and watch them take off. That's a real airline, with a real call sign, operating real flights, to a place the government wouldn't admit existed until August 2013. So when Bob Lazar says EG&G Special Projects called him, that's not a fictional company. That's the literal contractor that ran the Area 51 logistics chain. He's not making the name up. He couldn't have. In 1988, the name EG&G wasn't in any UFO book or any newspaper UFO story. The name only entered the public UFO conversation because Bob Lazar put it there. The interview at the EG&G offices at McCarran is brief. Lazar is told, "You are going to sign an NDA more aggressive than anything you've ever signed in your life. Then we will tell you what the work is." The NDA includes criminal penalties, the works, the clearance levels described as majestic. Whether majestic is a program name or a clearance designation or a code word for something else, Lazar has never fully specified because he doesn't know. He signs, he is given a badge, he's told to report to a staging area, he boards a white bus with the windows painted over, He cannot see where the bus goes. They drive for over an hour. Up the 95, past Indian Springs, into the Nevada test site. And the bus does not stop at Groom Lake. It does not stop at Area 51. It continues 15 miles south of Groom Lake to a facility built into the western slope of the Papoose mountain range on the edge of a dry lake bed called Papoose Lake. This facility is called Site 4. Bob just calls it S4 because that's what's printed on his badge. The U.S. government, as of recording this episode in 2026, has never confirmed S4 exists. So just so we're clear on the timeline, Area 51 wasn't acknowledged until 2013. S4 has never been acknowledged. When Bob Lazar told George Knapp in 1989 about a facility built into a mountain south of Groom Lake, he was describing infrastructure that the United States government would refuse to admit exists for at least the next 37 years and counting. S4 has 9 hangar doors cut into the mountain face. They are slanted to match the angle of the mountain slope. They are faced with rock and earth composite that matches the mountain texture. From overhead, from the kind of orbital angle a Soviet reconnaissance satellite would have used, they are invisible. They look like the mountain. They are not the mountain. They fold up. Bob drew these doors in 1989. He drew them again in 2018 for Corbell. The drawings are essentially identical 30 years apart. Years later, commercial satellite imagery, when it became available for that area, appears to show artificial straight-line features at the location Lazar described. That is not proof. But it is, to use a phrase, not nothing. Inside the hangars are the craft, 9 of them, not 1, not 3, 9. Lazar has been completely consistent on this since 1989, and frankly, I admire his commitment to a number that gives the skeptics maximum ammunition. Like, you couldn't say 5. 5 is fewer than 9. 5 sounds more reasonable. No, he says 9. Let me describe them. Not all of them. I'll do the ones he can describe in detail. The sport model, the smallest, the most aerodynamically elegant, about 30 to 35 feet across at the widest point, 16 feet tall. The shape is a smooth lens, like 2 shallow bowl shapes joined rim to rim. The surface is the smoothest manufactured surface Lazar has ever seen. No seams, no rivets, no fasteners, no external antennas, no landing gear, no visible ports. When the craft isn't operating, it rests on its lower hull. When it's operating, it doesn't rest on anything. It levitates. The interior of the sport model. This is the part the briefing folders prepared him for, and he still found weird. The interior is too small for normal-sized adult humans. Ceiling height around 4.5 feet. The seats are too small. The controls, and I'm going to say this carefully because it sounds insane, the controls are absent in the way we think of controls. No joystick, no buttons. The briefing materials suggested the craft was operated through a direct neural interface. Lazar's job was the reactor, not the cockpit, so he didn't have to grapple with this part. He just noted it and moved on. The top hat. Larger profile. The lower disc is broader, and the upper structure rises into a tall column. The silhouette genuinely looks like a top hat. Wide brim, tall crown. Yes, like the thing on the Monopoly guy. The jellyfish. Irregular curves. Organic-looking silhouette. The eye keeps trying to resolve it into a regular shape and can't. Lazar found this one the most disorienting to look at directly. The telephone receiver craft. Long and narrow, with a curve in the middle that makes it look like the handset of an old-style telephone. He saw this one only from a distance, the bird of prey. Bob has described this one with visible embarrassment because the comparison he reached for in the original 1989 interview was, it looks like a Klingon bird of prey from Star Trek. He knew exactly how this would sound. He used the reference anyway because it was the most accurate visual reference he could think of. You can either credit him for saying the thing that hurt his credibility because it was true, or you can hold it against him. I credit him for it. Liars don't pick the description that makes them look the most ridiculous. The damaged craft. At least one of the 9 showed obvious structural damage. Lazar was not told what caused it. He didn't ask. He had been warned at orientation not to discuss subjects outside his assigned area. He left it alone. The other 3 or 4, he has consistently said his access was minimal and he'd rather describe nothing than describe something wrong. Which is the third thing that keeps me convinced he's telling the truth. Bob Lazar polices the limits of his own story. He corrects people who put words in his mouth. He has said publicly that other people who claim to be associated with his program and have additional juicy details he never mentioned should be treated with skepticism. Grifters expand the grift. Bob Lazar shrinks it. That's the wrong shape for a fraud. Now the propulsion, because this is the part where the physics either holds together or it doesn't, and as we are about to see, it kind of stubbornly holds together. Lazar said in 1989 that the sport model's reactor was powered by a stable isotope of element 115. In 1989, element 115 did not exist on the periodic table. It was a predicted element. Physicists knew the table's pattern should allow for it. But no laboratory had synthesized it. It had no atomic measurements. It was a hypothetical gap. In August 2003, 14 years after Lazar named it, a joint team from JNR, Dubna in Russia, and Lawrence Livermore in the United States synthesized element 115 for the first time. They bombarded americium-243 with calcium-48 ions. They created 4 atoms. The element is now called moscovium. You can look it up on the periodic table in 2026. It is element 115. The same number Bob Lazar named in a Las Vegas television interview a decade and a half before any laboratory on Earth had successfully created it. Now, I want to fully acknowledge the skeptic move here. The skeptic move is, fine, he named the right element, but moscovium's most stable isotope so far has a half-life of about 220 milliseconds. It's not stable. So even if he got the element right, he got the stability wrong, which defeats the propulsion claim, right? Except for the island of stability. Okay, we have to talk about the island of stability for a minute because this is where the story stops sounding like science fiction and starts sounding like nuclear physics from your college textbook. The island of stability is a real mainstream peer-reviewed prediction in nuclear physics. It traces back to a 1969 paper by Glenn Seaborg, Nobel Prize-winning chemist, co-discoverer of plutonium, the man we named Seaborgium after. Seaborg looked at the nuclear shell model and noticed that certain proton and neutron counts, called magic numbers, produce unusually stable atomic configurations. The magic numbers we know about are 2, 8, 20, 28, 50, 82, and 126. Elements with proton numbers near the next predicted magic numbers above 82, specifically around 114, 120, and 126, should produce isotopes that are dramatically more stable than the WISPs we've made in colliders so far. Dramatically more stable doesn't mean milliseconds. It means potentially minutes, hours, days, maybe longer. So, When Bob Lazar in 1989 said stable isotope of element 115, he was not describing something physics says is impossible. He was describing something physics has been predicting since 1969, but hasn't yet figured out how to make. Impossible and beyond our current synthesis capability are not synonyms. He named the right element. He invoked the correct stability mechanism. In 1989, when the periodic table only had 109 confirmed elements on it, you can call that a lucky guess if you want. I have stopped being able to call it that. Here's the reactor mechanism, as Bob described it. The stable isotope of 115 goes into the reactor. High energy protons get fired at it. The 115 nucleus captures a proton, which bumps it to element 116, which was also not on the periodic table in 1989. Element 116, livermorium, was confirmed in 2000. Bob named that one too. Same prediction, same timeline. Element 116 immediately decays. The decay produces antimatter, specifically positrons, anti-electrons. The positrons get captured in a shaped magnetic containment apparatus, channeled into an annihilation chamber, annihilated against ordinary matter. Positron-electron annihilation produces gamma photons at 511 keV. That's textbook physics. That's real. But Bob says the reactor doesn't just produce heat from that annihilation. It produces a gravitational effect, a localized warping of space-time around the reactor housing. 3 gravity wave amplifiers on the lower hull of the sport model direct the warp. The craft doesn't move through space in the conventional sense. It warps space, contracts space-time ahead of it, expands space-time behind it, and falls forward into the contracted region. If that sounds familiar to you, that's because it is the Alcubierre drive. Miguel Alcubierre published the warp metric paper that bears his name in 1994. In Classical and Quantum Gravity, 5 years after Bob Lazar described basically the same mechanism on a local Las Vegas TV station. The Alcubierre paper describes a space-time geometry where a region of flat space-time is moved through space by expanding space-time behind it and contracting space-time ahead. The spacecraft sits in the flat region. The bubble moves. The occupants inside the bubble do not experience inertial forces because, relative to local space-time inside the bubble, they aren't accelerating. The bubble is being moved. That exactly matches what military pilots and radar operators have described about UAP behavior for 70 years. Right-angle turns at impossible speeds, instant stops, vertical climbs from hover to supersonic without sonic boom. The craft does the thing that should kill the pilot, because the pilot inside the bubble isn't experiencing the maneuver the bubble is. Harold White, the NASA EagleWorks physicist, has been publishing papers since 2011, working through the physical realizability of Alcubierre-type geometries. Credentialed NASA scientists, peer-reviewed journals. The exact propulsion concept Bob Lazar described in 1989. None of this proves Bob Lazar saw a working version. It does mean the physics is not crazy. It means that when Bob said the craft warps space in 1989, he was describing a propulsion geometry that NASA, 3 decades later, is still trying to figure out how to actually build. He was right, and he was early. And being right and early is what credentialed scientists do, not what frauds do. Frauds are wrong and late. He was allowed to watch a bench test of the sport model's reactor. The craft sat on the hangar floor. The team activated the reactor, no mechanical noise. A tonal hum through the structure of the hangar, and the craft just rose, smooth, quiet, to hover altitude, held position, didn't drift, didn't bob. Here's the detail that keeps me up at night, because it is the kind of detail a liar does not invent. Bob said you couldn't easily approach the craft from directly below. The space underneath it had a quality that made you not want to walk into it, not a physical barrier. An effect on your body's willingness to enter the space, like the gravity field was subtly distorting in a small radius around the lower hull. When he described this to his supervisor, the supervisor nodded like it was a known characteristic of the operation that they just hadn't bothered to mention during orientation. Think about that. The supervisor's reaction was, yeah, that happens. What about it? Liars don't invent boring, corroborating details with shoulder-shrugging supervisors. Liars invent angels sang details. Liars invent the camera-ready moment. Bob invented an, oh yeah, that detail with a body language description. That's how you tell. Okay. Now the part where this stops being just a physics story and starts being a thriller. Bob was eventually invited to attend a nighttime test flight at S4. The flights happened on Wednesday nights over Papoose Lake. He went. He saw the sport model execute a sequence of impossible maneuvers, vertical jumps with no acceleration ramp, hovers, instant translations, and then he made the mistake that ended his career and started his life. He decided to show his wife. On 3 consecutive Wednesday nights, Bob drove his then-wife Tracy and his friend Gene Huff out to Highway 375, which is the road that would later become known as the extraterrestrial highway, partly because of Bob, to a vantage point where they could look toward S4. They watched the craft on all 3 nights. The 3rd night they stayed too long. They were noticed. Security came. Not state troopers, federal security contractors. The specific bearing of people who work for a classified program. The car was approached. Bob, Tracy, and Gene were detained. Briefly, then released. Within days, Bob's S4 access was revoked. His EG&G contract was terminated. He was called to the EG&G offices for what was, and I'm phrasing this carefully, not a routine exit interview. He was reminded, with specific language about consequences, that his NDA obligations were permanent. He was told that his employment history and his credential history could be made to go away. You're an engineer. You're sitting across the table from a man telling you that your existence in official records is, at his employer's discretion, editable. What do you think the next step after deleting you from the record might be? Bob thought about that, and he decided the only protection available to him was publicity. If a lot of people knew his story, the program couldn't quietly do anything to him without it becoming a news event. So he went to a guy in his social circle who knew a guy at the local TV station. That station was KLS TV. That guy was George Knapp. George Knapp at this point, in 1989, is investigative reporter at KLS in Las Vegas. He has a Peabody Award. He has won an IRE Award. He is not a tabloid guy. He has the credibility to run a serious story and not get killed by his own station. Knapp meets Bob. Knapp decides to verify what he can. He drives to Los Alamos. He goes to the lab. He says, "Do you have a Robert Lazar in your records?" The lab says, on camera, with the camera rolling, "No. We have no record of a Robert Lazar. He never worked here." Knapp is now in the position you do not envy. He has a guy in Las Vegas making outlandish claims. The lab is on tape saying the guy doesn't exist. His career is on the line. He drives back to his hotel, and he thinks, let me just check the phone book. He pulls a 1982 LANL internal phone directory. He flips through the L's, and there it is. Lazar, Robert. Kirkmeyer Inc. Lamp. Mail stop. H841. The lab lied. On camera. To an investigative reporters and editors award winner. The phone book caught them. I want you to sit with that for one full second. Because that phone book is not Lazar's evidence. He didn't produce it. He didn't print it. He didn't fake it. George Knapp went and got it independently. And the laboratory has, as of 2026, never explained the contradiction. They didn't say, oh, our records were incomplete. They didn't say, we have a different Robert Lazar. They went silent because they got caught. Once you accept that the lab was running a cover story about Bob Lazar's employment, the next question writes itself. Why? Why would anybody scrub a low-level contract technician from official records? You only run a cover story like that when there is something underneath you need to hide. The thing underneath is S4. May 1989, Knapp runs his first KLAS series. Bob is identified as Dennis. His face is blurred. His voice is altered. The series gets moderate regional attention. November 1989, KLAS broadcasts a second series with Bob's real name. Unblurred face, unaltered voice. This is the version that goes national. And then the screws start turning. April 1990, 5 months after the November broadcast. Bob Lazar is arrested. The charge is felony pandering. Now, felony pandering sounds like Bob was running a prostitution ring. Let me tell you what the actual underlying facts are. Bob's small technical contracting company had installed computer systems and video monitoring equipment for a brothel in Pahrump, Nevada. Brothels are legal in that part of Nevada. Installing computers for a legal business is legal. Bob's company got paid for the work. Standard contracting transaction. The catch. The brothel had not fully completed certain licensing paperwork during the window Bob's company performed the work. Under Nevada law, this created an ambiguity about whether the business was in full compliance during that specific window. The prosecution's theory was that by installing computers during the technically not fully licensed window, Bob had knowingly participated in pandering. This is, to put it bluntly, one of the thinnest bases for a felony I've ever read. Bob didn't run the brothel. He didn't manage the brothel. He didn't recruit for the brothel. He installed networking equipment. The decision by Clark County to pursue felony charges, specifically against him, specifically 5 months after a nationally broadcast UFO disclosure, has been described by every researcher who has looked at the case file as, let's just say, unusual. Bob took an offered plea, which is the specific legal mechanism where you accept a conviction without admitting guilt. You just acknowledge the prosecution has enough evidence to convict if you go to trial. He got probation, no prison time. He has said on the record that he believes the arrest was retaliatory. The prosecutor has denied it. The court file is public. You can read it, make your own call. Bob does something unexpected next. He doesn't lean into the UFO scene. He doesn't do the convention tour. He doesn't sell merch. He moves to Michigan. He founds a company called United Nuclear Scientific Equipment and Supplies. The business model: sell lab equipment, scientific supplies, and low-grade educational radioactive isotopes to schools, science museums, and serious hobbyist scientists. Legal business, federally regulated. He builds it by hand the same way he built the jet car. Over 20 years, it becomes a functioning, legitimate operation. He almost never gives interviews, doesn't push a book, doesn't sell a course. The only person who can occasionally get him to sit for cameras is George Knapp, when Knapp is putting together a retrospective. And here, again, let me ask you to compare and contrast. A normal grifter in possession of Bob Lazar's story in the 1990s with the UFO conference circuit and the early UFO publishing boom and the pre-YouTube TV history specials industry, that grifter clears conservatively a couple $1 million a decade. Bob Lazar sold lab equipment in Michigan and did not cash any of those checks. Whatever you think of his story, you have to grapple with the fact that he did not behave like a person who fabricated it for personal gain. Because he didn't gain, he paid. Skip forward to 2017, and 2017 gets ugly in a way that is, let's call it, circumstantial but not subtle. Jeremy Corbell is a documentary filmmaker who has spent years trying to convince Bob to sit for the most comprehensive on-camera interview of his life. In early 2017, Bob agrees. The interview is scheduled. On March 14, 2017, the FBI shows up at United Nuclear Scientific Equipment and Supplies with agents from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. The stated reason: an administrative compliance review of Bob's licensure to sell radioactive materials. The same materials he had been legally selling under the same NRC regulatory framework for over 20 years, with the same customer list, with no prior compliance issues. The raid is conducted with tactical intensity, multiple agents, documentation of everything, seizure of materials, including business records and computer equipment. The Corbell interview was scheduled 2 days later. The FBI never charged Bob with any crime arising from the raid. In the 8 years since, no charges have been filed. Materials seized have, to Bob's knowledge, never been fully returned. The FBI has not released a public inventory. Bob has said that among the materials seized was a small sample of element 115 that he claims he had retained from S4. The FBI has neither confirmed nor denied. You make of that what you will. I have made up my mind about what to make of it. The Corbell documentary was released anyway on December 4th, 2018 on Netflix. It became the highest rated UFO documentary on the platform within its first week. And on June 20th, 2019, Bob and Jeremy sat down with Joe Rogan. JRE 1315. 3 hours. Bob is in a flannel shirt. He looks tired. He answers everything in short, slightly impatient sentences. He does not perform. At several points during that interview, he says some version of, "I wish I'd never done this. I get harassed. My family gets harassed. I can't get normal engineering work in the United States. If I could go back to 1989, I wouldn't have done the Knapp interview." That is not the energy of a grifter. Grifters love being on stage. Bob Lazar resents being on Joe Rogan's stage. He answers because he was asked. He goes home. Okay. Modern context. Because I know what some of you are saying right now, which is, Isaac, this is all decades old TV interview stuff. Where's the modern confirmation? December 16th, 2017. The New York Times publishes a front page investigation. Helene Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, Leslie Keane as the byline. The story reveals the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP, a classified Department of Defense program funded at around $22 million per year, focused on studying UAP encounters by U.S. military personnel. The story includes the flare-on video, the now famous Tic Tac encounter between Navy pilots from the USS Nimitz and an unknown craft executing impossible maneuvers off the California coast in November 2004. The New York Times. Front page, above the fold, validating in the most mainstream media way possible the core architectural claim Bob Lazar made in 1989. There's a classified program. They study these things. They take it seriously. They don't talk about it publicly. July 26th, 2023. David Grush, a former Air Force intelligence officer who had served on the UAP task force, testifies under oath to the House Oversight Subcommittee. He says, under penalty of perjury, the United States is in possession of recovered non-human craft. Multiple programs exist. Multiple participants exist. Some of those participants have faced retaliation for trying to brief Congress. He says he has been briefed on non-human biologics recovered from crash sites. Grush doesn't say S4. He doesn't say element 115. He doesn't name Bob Lazar. But the architecture of what he described under oath in 2023 is the same architecture Bob Lazar described on a local Las Vegas TV channel in 1989. The recovered craft, the reverse engineering, the cover-up apparatus, the suppression of witnesses. The world Grush is describing in 2023 is the world Bob Lazar said existed in 1988. So, here is where I land. The skeptical case against Bob Lazar has 3 pillars. Pillar 1, he fabricated his academic credentials. Pillar 2, he made a lucky guess about element 115. Pillar 3, his story is internally consistent because it's a well-crafted fiction. Against Pillar 1, the Los Alamos phone book exists. The government has demonstrated it is willing to lie about Bob's records. The MIT and Caltech denials may be true. They may be more the same lie. We don't have a phone book analog for MIT to settle it. Against Pillar 2, he didn't just name element 115. He described the nuclear pathway, proton capture, decay, to 116, antimatter emission. He described the correct stability mechanism, the island of stability. He described a propulsion geometry that mainstream physics now calls the Alcubierre drive, 5 years before Alcubierre published. That's not a lucky guess. That's a coherent, graduate-level physics description that holds up under technical review. You don't get that by guessing. Against Pillar 3, the details that hold the story together are the wrong details for a fabricator to invent. The slanted hangar doors matching the mountain slope. The interior of the sport model, too small for normal humans. The boring supervisor reaction to the gravitational effect under the hovering craft. Liars invent the dramatic stuff. They don't invent the supervisor's body language. And then the accumulation. The 1982 Jet Car newspaper, the phone book, the 2003 synthesis of element 115, the 2013 acknowledgement of Area 51, the Alcubierre paper, the EagleWorks warp drive research, the 2017 raid timing, the Elizondo disclosures, the Grush testimony. Each item on its own is not definitive. Taken together, they form a pattern that is very difficult to explain by coincidence if Bob was lying. I believe him. I believe he was at S4. I believe he worked on the propulsion system of a craft of non-human origin. I believe the credentials were scrubbed. I believe the pandering arrest was retaliation. I believe the 2017 raid was a message. I believe the element 115 sample was real and is now sitting in a federal vault under a different label. I also believe he is a tired man who wanted to build jet cars and instead spent the rest of his life explaining himself to people who think the only available categories are liar and lunatic. He is neither. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the right kind of brain, and he did the thing his technical character demanded. He told the truth. This was episode 1 of Documented. I'm Isaac. The sources, the LANL phone book scan, the 1982 Jet Car newspaper, the Dubana synthesis paper, the NAB tapes, the JRE timestamps, the Grush testimony transcript, the Alcubierre paper, the Corbell documentary, the FBI raid coverage, All of it is in the show notes. Next episode, we are doing Project Stargate. The CIA spent 20 years and $20 million running a psychic spy program. The documents are declassified. You can read them. 2 independent statisticians who reviewed the data agreed the effect is real. It's going to be a fun one. Hit follow. Tell a friend. And if I disappear before the next episode drops, you know where to look. This was documented. We'll be back.